Hi, I'm Bright Candle. Today we're going to be looking at the performance of different memory allocators that Arma 3 can use. We're going to be using a 6700K at 4.5 GHz with a 1080p graphics card. So if we see any GPU bottlenecks, and it's very likely that most people will see those as well, this is a reasonably decent graphic card. We're going to be using the default memory allocators, but we also have a newly compiled TBB that's been provided by Deadman from the Discord and from the forums. And we're going to be able to do two tests with that new TDB allocator, one without huge pages and one with, and all of the tests are going to be done in x64. This first test we're looking at Yabbas 0.99 from February this year, which is the latest version that's available. And Yabbas is a very CPU driven benchmark with a lot of shooting and fighting in and around the town, and it lasts for about 2.5 minutes. Initially we're looking at the frame times for Yabbas here. We have 5 different allocators, default, JMalloc and TBB malloc, and then we've got the 2 DM compiled TBB mallocs with huge pages on and not. And while we can see that there's a slightly different runtime associated with them, there's not a whole lot to show that's different between them. It does appear that the default is slightly lower on average, and JMalloc and TBB malloc appear to be higher on average, with the new Deadman compiled one somewhere in the middle. When we sort the frame times, we see the difference become a little bit more apparent. We can see that the best performing one here is the new compiled TBB malloc with huge pages on, which is just a little bit better than the default most of the time, and then the other 3 are a fair bit worse. Most people are more familiar with FPS values, and we can see that the default and the TBB malloc compiled by Deadman with huge pages on perform very similar, with the huge pages just a little bit better. The original TBB malloc seems to perform pretty much the same as the new compiled one, so there's no performance advantage coming from that, and we can see that the JMalloc just performs worse overall. Alongside the frame times and FPS numbers, I also captured the GPU and CPU utilization as well. We can see that GPU utilization goes along with the frame rate. The higher the frame rate was from the allocator, the higher the GPU usage was. So we're definitely in a CPU limited scenario here. We also see that we get maybe 30% CPU usage, which is just a little over 3 cores in total. So in conclusion, in Yabbas, there's not a great deal between the different allocators. You will get a benefit if you use Deadman's huge pages one for this particular benchmark, but it's a really very small performance improvement. Next we're going to be looking at the very commonly benchmarked Infantry Showcase. This benchmark's 1 minute long, but I actually control the movement and do so in a repeatable way. Frame times are a lot more stable in the Infantry Showcase, so we see a few spikes here and there for the different allocators, but the amount of stutter that the default allocator produces near the end of the benchmark is quite interesting. And once we sort the frame times, we can see the default allocator separates itself from the others at the end due to that stuttering period. We also see that difference come up in the average FPS numbers as well, where the default allocator runs just a little bit worse than the others. The utilization figures for the GPU show us why it is that the Infantry Showcase is a lot more stable and a lot less stuttery, and the reason for that is that it's mostly GPU limited. We can see the CPU usage is just a little bit lower, just below 30%. Next we're looking at Kavala. It's just a simple walk through the town. And the reason we do Kavala is because it's one of the most taxing areas in the original game's content, at least. This, unlike the Infantry Showcase, is normally a very CPU limited scenario, despite the fact that there is nothing on the map except the player. The frame times and sorted frame times show no real difference between the allocators here. We can see that the default and the huge pages allocators perform very similar on average. However, the worst case scenario, the huge pages, does quite significantly worse, and does worse than the other 3 allocators as well. When we get to the utilization figures, we see something quite interesting here. With the performance between default and huge pages being very similar, they get very similar GPU usage, but you can see there's quite a significant increase in CPU usage for the huge pages allocator, and that suggests that, the actual allocator itself is doing more, since the average FPS is surprisingly similar. The question after all of this is going to be, is trying a different allocator, and specifically these 2 new allocators, worth it? And I think the answer to that is kind of no. While in some cases it can perform better, in others it produces more stutter and is worse. So it's not a clear performance boost from any of the additional allocators, and the default seems to, for the most part, do averagely well, except in that one scenario right at the end of the Infantry Showcase. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look into the different memory allocators. I also collected some additional data on various different graphics settings, so look for that in the future.